Exiting the shower, I heard my cell phone ring, prompting a curse as I hurriedly wrapped a towel around myself. The man seated before me bore the name Carl Montefiore. Tall and angular, with a somewhat smug countenance, he was, perhaps, conventionally handsome. Even had he not been involved with my wife, I might have felt inclined to confront him. However, there was nothing smug about his expression now, it was one of shock. He had anticipated a meeting with a potential client for his software company, not an encounter with a betrayed husband. Rising to greet me with a cordial smile, he seemed to have no recollection of our previous encounters, despite having met on multiple occasions. "Good morning, Mr. Reagan, is it? Nice to meet you. Please, take a seat," he said, extending a firm and confident handshake, characteristic of a seasoned salesman. Seating myself, I regarded him coldly for a moment before speaking. "Actually, it's not Reagan, Carl, it's Proctor. David Proctor, husband of Lauren. Lauren Proctor from your Human Resources Department, the woman you've been involved with for the past few months." His face tensed, and he remained silent, his gaze fixed on the far wall. I retrieved a set of photographs from an envelope and placed them before him. These were taken at the Best Western Kenwood Inn on Montgomery Road. Room 128, to be precise. "It seems you both have a preference for that room." More silence followed. "Who covers the expenses for the room, Carl, do you or my wife?" I already knew the answer, but I wanted to hear it from him. "I do," he replied eventually, his eyes averting mine. "I have an arrangement with the manager. We handle their bookkeeping and reservation software." There was another pause. I felt no urgency. Anger had consumed me for nearly 5 weeks, so there was no need to rush. "All right," he conceded. "So, what now? What do you want?" His demeanor suddenly aged, as if the vitality had drained from him. "What is it you're after?" "In my car outside, Carl, there's a large envelope addressed to your wife's office. I'll be heading to the FedEx office after our meeting, unless you cooperate extensively." His complexion paled, though he remained seated. I couldn't help but admire his composure, albeit ironically. It would be detrimental if Emily were to discover this. He looked at me intently. "What exactly do you want from me?" Handing him a sheet of paper, I instructed, "Review this and then call my wife immediately. Have the conversation as outlined here. You can adjust the wording, use whatever affectionate terms you typically do with her, but ensure it sounds natural, like what she would expect from you. Set it up exactly as I've written." He carefully reviewed the script and then looked up. "I don't know if she's going to agree to this." I chuckled. "Carl, I've listened to the audio recordings of several of your encounters with my wife. You two have engaged in much kinkier activities." He actually blushed at the mention of me hearing them together. After a moment of thought, he frowned and asked, "And if I agree to this? What happens next?" I shrugged. "Then you're done dealing with me. As for you and Lauren, after today, I couldn't care less." "And the FedEx envelope for my wife?" I shrugged again. "I'll dispose of it." "Do I have your word on that, Mr. Proctor?" Leaning forward, I replied, "You're hardly in a position to negotiate, Carl. But yes, you have my word." He glanced at the script once more, then looked back at me. When I didn't react, he sighed and reached for the phone. "As for me and Lauren? It's mostly the same old story, no need to elaborate. We met while she was in college and I had just started working. It was a blind date arranged by my cousin Marie, who thought we'd hit it off, and she was right. Our courtship was typical, but wonderful. I fell for Lauren by the 5th date, and she seemed to feel the same about me. The intimacy was initially cautious but grew more passionate over time. We tied the knot after about 14 months, with Marie as her maid of honor and my brother Bobby as my best man. We had Tina shortly afterward, an unplanned but delightful surprise. She's a talented tennis player, a stellar student, and a gifted artist, a vibrant, lovable girl whom I adore. Lauren and I used to joke that we only had one child but got the best one. I would have described our marriage and life as great. I often did whenever someone asked. Lauren could be a bit flirtatious at parties with our friends, but she always reassured me afterward. Our intimacy was never better than after those nights out when she reaffirmed her attractiveness to men. I never doubted Lauren's commitment to me in our 19 years together. There were no suspicious signs, no sudden rushes home, no late nights at work, no marks on her body. Our sexual frequency and quality remained consistent. In hindsight, maybe Lauren seemed a bit happier that spring, a tad livelier and more fun. But it was subtle, and I wouldn't have noticed if not for discovering her affair. Tina uncovered the truth. It was one of the hardest parts, though it was all difficult. On an early April Saturday during her senior year, while I was helping my brother move furniture, Tina returned home unexpectedly around 11 a.m. due to a canceled tennis tournament caused by heavy rain the day before. Her teammate Avery had dropped her off. Tina came home, dropped her bag, and grabbed a Diet Coke from the fridge before intending to call a friend about a party. However, she was stunned when she accidentally heard something disturbing on the phone. She quickly turned it off and cautiously approached the master bedroom, where she overheard her mother engaged in an intimate conversation. Feeling shaken, Tina retreated to the kitchen, grabbed her tennis bag, and left the house. She found solace at a nearby playground, where she spent hours crying before gathering herself and returning home. I wasn't aware of this incident for nearly 2 weeks. During that time, Tina seemed withdrawn and melancholic, which was unusual for her. I asked Lauren if she noticed anything wrong, but she was as puzzled as I was. It wasn't until we were driving back from a tennis tournament that Tina finally opened up. She had performed poorly and lost, which was out of character for her. Sensing her distress, I stopped at a Starbucks, bought us drinks, and parked in a Walmart lot. I gently encouraged Tina to share what was troubling her. Initially hesitant, Tina eventually confessed that she had discovered her mother's infidelity. Shocked, I restrained my initial reaction and listened as Tina recounted what she had experienced. Scene 3. It was utterly inconceivable for me to accept. While I believed every word Tina uttered, grasping the full implications fell beyond my reach. We shared tears for a while, and then I implored her to keep our conversation confidential while I delved deeper into the matter. Thus, Tina and I forged a silent agreement, a pact to conceal our suspicions and emotions from Lauren. Surprisingly, this pact brought us closer together, despite our already strong bond. Like any deceived spouse, I resorted to the typical course of action. I hired a private investigator and let him pursue the truth. 3 weeks later, armed with the investigator's report, photos, and audio recordings, I confronted the harsh reality. On a Thursday, I secluded myself in my office, silenced the phone, and immersed myself in the damning evidence. I cried, cursed, and vented my anger, even hurling a shoe across the room in frustration. As I tried to regain composure around 1:30, I ventured out for a late lunch, where I began to outline my next steps over a meal. Despite our seemingly ordinary married life, my relationship with Lauren meant everything to me. For nearly 2 decades, I cherished her passionately and never doubted my immense fortune in having her as my wife. We shared profound conversations, enjoyed each other's company, and aligned on life's values and aspirations. I would have sworn we were the happiest, most solid couple I knew. Or so I thought. However, after perusing the investigator's findings, I realized our marriage was irreparably fractured. While I might have been able to forgive a fleeting infidelity, the evidence revealed a prolonged affair between Lauren and Carl Montefiore, filled with mutual pleasure and intimacy surpassing anything we shared. With a heavy heart, I picked Tina up from school one day and took her out to lunch. Shielding her from the explicit details, I disclosed the truth about the affair and my decision to end the marriage. Tina was enraged and despondent. She wanted to confront Lauren immediately, but I urged restraint. "Honey, your mother loves you deeply. She didn't betray you, she betrayed me. It's my burden to bear," I explained gently. "Can you keep up appearances for a few more weeks? Act as you normally would until after graduation?" She nodded through her tears. "I'll try, Daddy. If that's what you want. But it's just, how could she do this to you, to us? You've always been so good to her, and—" Her voice trailed off as she sobbed, and I enveloped her in a comforting embrace. In the end, Tina agreed to maintain the facade of a loving daughter until her high school graduation. 3 days later, she was headed to a 10-week junior development tennis camp in Colorado, followed by enrollment at USC after a week at home. I assured Tina that I would initiate the divorce proceedings after she left for the summer. And then I'll take some time off and travel. Honey, how about if I come stay in Denver for a few days and visit? She sniffled, wiped her eyes, attempted a smile, and replied, Yeah, Daddy, that would be great. Scene 4. I had taken care of all the necessary arrangements in advance. I secured an apartment, sorted out financial matters regarding credit cards and our checking account, and obtained time off from work to fly out to the West Coast. My plan was to visit my college roommate in San Francisco for a few days, drive through the Rockies, spend some time with Tina in Colorado, and then return home. As soon as Lauren left for work that morning, I waited for the movers to arrive and transport my belongings to the new apartment. Then, I proceeded to confront Carl Montefiore, as I had mentioned earlier. Afterward, I grabbed some lunch and dropped off the envelope addressed to Mrs. Montefiore at the FedEx box near the courthouse. Did you honestly expect me to keep my promise to that jerk? After he had been involved with my wife for weeks. At 1:45, I parked my car behind a restaurant across from the Best Western, found a concealed spot, and observed. I watched as Lauren arrived, parked in front of room 128, went to the main office, returned with a key card, and let herself into the room. She carried a shopping bag, likely containing items Carl had requested during their phone conversation. After waiting for about 10 minutes, I approached the door, retrieved the key card from under the mat, and entered. There was Lauren, my wife, the woman I had loved and been faithful to for 20 years. She lay on the bed, wearing a seductive black teddy and nothing else, positioned on her stomach with pillows supporting her hips, leaving her open for view. She also wore a sleep mask, unable to see anything. I noticed her tense as the door opened and closed. Carl? Oh, you scared me, baby. I was just lying here, and... Shoo, I whispered softly, moving closer to the bed to speak directly into her ear. You're quite the naughty little thing, aren't you? My little peach. That's what he called her in some of the recordings I'd heard, no idea why. I had spritzed on a bit of Carl's cologne, ensuring she wouldn't suspect a thing. And now that I'm here, I'm going to drive you wild. I maintained a hushed tone, confident she wouldn't recognize my voice. Without further ado, I located the shopping bag on a nearby chair and retrieved the handcuffs. I secured Lauren's hands above her head, then produced a length of rope from my pocket. After fastening one end to the handcuffs, I slid the rope under the bed and circled around to secure it to the other side. Taking 2 shorter lengths of rope, I tethered one end to each of her ankles and the other to the bed frame. Now she was immobilized in the middle of the bed, unable to lower her arms, sit up, close her legs, or turn over. You've been a naughty girl, haven't you? I murmured. She giggled, and I playfully spanked her behind, eliciting a squeal. It wasn't a forceful strike, certainly not reflecting the anger I harbored. Oh yes, baby, I've been very naughty. Are you going to punish me? She grinned, enticing me by lifting her bare behind off the bed and wiggling it provocatively. Without a word, I undressed and placed my clothes on a nearby chair. Then I waited in silence, knowing she couldn't discern my whereabouts. Carl? Baby? Her voice was tinged with excitement, but also a hint of nervousness. I made her wait a few more minutes while she called out to me, or him, I suppose, several times. Then, without warning, I began delivering firm smacks to her buttocks, alternating between each cheek for a total of 20 strikes. Oh. Carl. What? That. Ouch. Hurts, baby, what? When I finished, she exclaimed, Damn, baby, that hurt. What was that for? I lay atop her, pressing my erection against her backside, and whispered into her ear. Aren't you a naughty girl? A little minx? A minx who cheats on her husband? Frowning, she protested, no talking about him, remember? Ignoring her plea, I persisted. What do you think he'd say if he saw you like this, my little peach? Bound to the bed, your behind and pussy exposed for me, what would he say? Stop it, baby. Lauren whined. Just touch me, okay? Make love to me. Breathlessly, she added, I know I'm bad, baby, be my naughty man and punish me. And so I did. I carried out my planned punishment, fully aware it would be the last time I'd ever lay a hand on her, the final time I'd see her unclothed. I positioned myself between her parted legs and fervently kissed and caressed her until she was panting and writhing with desire. And just as she was on the brink of climaxing, I ceased my ministrations. Remember, this was the woman I had been intimate with for 20 years. I knew her responses quite well, and I waited until the very last moment. Then, a short gasp escaped her lips, abruptly silenced. I observed her closely as her expression shifted to one of terror, her eyes widening and her mouth contorting into a frightened grimace. I had a myriad of angry words ready, weeks of pent-up rage and misery I was prepared to unleash on her. But instead, I remained silent, merely watching her face as she processed the events that transpired in that motel room over the past 2 hours. Lauren turned visibly pale, nervously licking her lips as she gazed at my stoic expression. David, oh my God. David. I can't think what you, honey. It wasn't what. She couldn't complete a sentence, which was perhaps unsurprising given the circumstances. I silently observed as tears began to stream down her cheeks. She lay there, naked except for the bunched-up teddy around her chest, sweat glistening on her skin, cum trickling from her pussy, hands bound above her head, and started to sob, shaking her head, still looking at me but shaking her head, repeating, no, I assent you can't, it's not. I rose to my feet and continued to watch her, still maintaining my silence, as her sobbing intensified. Then, I retrieved a prepaid cell phone and dialed a preset number. When the voice on the other end answered, Eyewitness News tip line, I reported, yeah, I'm at the Best Western Kenwood on Montgomery Road, and there's some sort of domestic dispute or sexual encounter happening in the next room, room 128. Yeah, I added. I can't tell if a lady is being assaulted or what, but there's a lot of screaming and yelling. I already called 911, but I thought I'd inform you guys too. Without waiting for a response, I ended the call. Lauren had ceased crying. She twisted her head to look up at me, a horrified expression etched on her face. No, baby, please, don't let anybody see me. Please, baby, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. Please, Dave. Locking eyes with her, I dialed the phone again, 911, what is your emergency? The voice inquired. Yeah, I'm at the Best Western Kenwood, and some guy is engaging in sexual activity with a woman in room 128, and the door is wide open, you can see everything. I walked by with my kids and my God, he's got her tied down on the bed and everything. I hung up the phone. Lauren was now crying out frantically, writhing in an attempt to free herself. Please, baby, please, you're not going to leave me here. I'm begging you, please. I crouched down and covered her mouth with my hand, gripping her face tightly to prevent her from wriggling away. Her eyes reflected sheer panic as she stared back at me. I held her in that position for a couple of minutes, simply gazing at her. Gazing at the face of the woman I had loved for almost my entire adult life. Then, I released her and exited the room, disregarding her desperate cries and pleas echoing behind me. Using a cushion from the couch, I propped the door wide open and walked out into the parking lot, heading towards a bench near the street. In about 4 minutes, a large Eyewitness News van pulled into the lot. I waited until I spotted 2 individuals, one wielding a sizable camera, heading towards the open door of room 128. Then, I crossed the street, climbed into my car, and drove away. Scene 5. There must be one final scene, mustn't there? It would be tempting to conclude it there, with Lauren bound to the bed, the news crew entering the room, and the police en route. But there's always the aftermath, whether desired or not. Unless someone's deceased, I suppose. Then there's no aftermath, for them, at least. It was a Saturday in mid-September as I drove back to the house, the same house where Lauren, Tina, and I used to reside together. Now, however, I lived in a downtown apartment. Tina was in her USC dorm, and the house was up for sale. Lauren couldn't manage the mortgage alone. After my ordeal with Lauren, I flew out to San Francisco for a vacation, visited my brother, drove through the Rockies, and had a wonderful time with my daughter. Upon returning home, I began constructing a new life as a single man. I initiated divorce proceedings through my lawyer and avoided all contact with Lauren except for leaving a message stating that she had until November 1st to buy my share of the house, or else I would sell it. Despite her persistent calls and emails, I remained silent. There was nothing I wanted to say to her, nor anything I desired to hear from her. I had a friend monitor the media coverage of our incident. It garnered a couple of articles in the local newspaper and a few days of speculative stories on the local eyewitness news channel. The coverage was limited, with no images of Lauren's face, and no names mentioned to avoid legal repercussions. Meanwhile, Mrs. Montefiore took her husband to task, resulting in Lauren losing her job due to the scandal. Word spread among our friends about the identity of the woman involved in the motel incident, confirming the situation for me. Now, Lauren was forced to take a lower-paying administrative job farther away, and it was evident she wouldn't be able to maintain the house. Tina, still seething with anger, barely communicated with her mother during the brief time they spent together before Tina returned to college. As I parked in the driveway and entered the house, Lauren was seated at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, observing my arrival. "Hello, David," she greeted softly. "Lauren," I responded. She appeared older, slightly diminished. It was clear she hadn't been sleeping or eating well, but my sympathy was limited. "Care for some coffee?" she offered. "No, thank you," I declined, opting for a glass of water before sitting down. She motioned toward the counter and remarked, "The papers are all there. I've signed them. How long until I need to find a new place?" "Probably 2 to 3 months, even if it sells quickly." "I'll keep you updated," I replied. There was a moment of silence before she spoke again. "I know it's over," she confessed. "I've had plenty of time to think, to reflect on my actions. I've considered how I'd feel if the roles were reversed, if you were the one having an affair behind my back. And I couldn't even fathom the idea of taking you back, no matter the circumstances. The sense of betrayal, the shock and embarrassment, the anger of being deceived and treated with such disregard." She gazed at me, unhappy yet composed. "I'm simply trying to convey that I understand, David. Or at least, I partially understand. I won't claim to truly comprehend what you went through. If there were any chance, any way at all you could, I don't know, consider giving me another chance. I would do anything, pour out every ounce of love and dedication within me to make amends for what I've done. But I don't anticipate that possibility." Her eyes briefly met mine, but all she could have perceived was a vacant expression. "So what I truly wanted to express is, I'm sorry. Sorry for betraying you, sorry for acting in such a manner, sorry for disrespecting all the love, loyalty, and support you've given me since the day we met. I'm certain my apology holds little significance to you, but you still deserve it, and I felt compelled to offer it." She held my gaze, likely hoping for even a hint of comfort from me, but I remained silent. I simply returned her gaze, no nod, no acknowledgement. Just a stare. "Did Tina inform you how we found out?" She nodded, her face contorted with anguish. I asked her repeatedly, and she eventually divulged. I feel dreadful about that. For what it's worth, David, it was never about humiliating or hurting you. I realize I was foolish to believe I could keep it hidden, but that's what I attempted to do. We were, or at least we thought we were, being very cautious. She began to recount how it all began, and I raised my hand. I don't want to hear it. I don't care about the start, the reasons behind it, or the duration. You wanted to convey your apology, all right, you've done so. Anything else? I knew I was being callous, and it was somewhat surprising how effortlessly it came to me. She was in pain, yet I found myself utterly disinterested in offering consolation or even basic decency. You commit the offense, you face the consequences. And it was my marriage she had shattered, my content life she had shattered into a million pieces. As I waited, a tear trickled down her cheek. No, David, I suppose there isn't anything else. Without another word, I picked up the signed documents, turned, and exited the house. Thanks for watching and have a great day. Write your opinion in the comments.